At my sister's wedding, the coordinator pointed me to a folding chair by the exit, alone, next to the coat rack. "Family sits up front," my father said to the photographer, smiling like he meant it. Then a tall stranger brushed my elbow and whispered, "Act like you're with me." He offered an arm. The cameras pivoted. So did the night. My name is Rhea Calder. I am 32 years old, and at my sister's wedding, I was invisible. The venue was the Chapel of the Reflected Sky at Lakeshore Hall, Braxton Vale's premier destination for six-figure declarations of love. It was less a chapel and more an architectural feat of defiance, a cathedral of reinforced glass and white-painted steel, cantilevered over the placid, metallic blue surface of the lake. The late afternoon sun streamed in, mercilessly bright, illuminating every particle of dust that danced in the air. The scent was a sanitized, corporate version of romance, the thick, waxy sweetness of thousands of white orchids battling the sharp, chemical tang of industrial floor polish. Underpinning it all was the mournful, elegant sawing of a string quartet playing something Vivaldi adjacent that was just generic enough to be inoffensive. It was beautiful, expensive, and utterly sterile. My designated spot was not one of the cushioned, white satin-draped chairs reserved for guests. It was a single, white folding chair, the kind stored by the dozen in a janitor's closet, placed by the heavy oak doors leading to the foyer. It was tucked directly behind a faux mahogany coat rack, already draped with the expensive outerwear of the earliest arriving, most important guests. A wedding coordinator, a young woman with a clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield and a headset microphone taped to her cheek, had pointed me to it. "Ms. Calder, your seat?" she had murmured, her eyes defaulting to a spot just over my left shoulder, the lie of a last-minute seating mix-up hanging stale and sour in the air between us. I am Rhea Calder, the bride's older sister, and I was being seated with the Coates. It was a message, delivered with the brutal, smiling politeness my family specialized in. I was family by blood, but I was not family in function. I was an inconvenient fact, a loose thread in the perfect tapestry they were weaving for this merger. I watched my father, Arthur Calder, work the room, or rather, work the cameras. The primary photographer, a wiry man with two camera bodies strapped to his chest like ammunition, was orchestrating a candid family moment near the flower-drenched altar. "Just the immediate family. Big smiles," he called out. Arthur stepped forward, beaming, pulling my stepmother, Clarissa, and my sister, Elowen, into a perfect tableau of paternal pride. He said something to the photographer, his voice resonating with practiced warmth, loud enough for the first few rows of whispering guests to hear. "Family sits up front, always," he smiled, a performance of loving tradition that had graced the covers of a dozen regional business magazines. The photographer clicked, laughed at some unheard pleasantry, and then turned to adjust a light stand. In that instant, the millisecond the lens was off him, Arthur's gaze drifted. It scanned the room and found mine in the back. The smile didn't just fade. It was vacuum-sealed and stored away. His eyes, cold and assessing, held mine for a single, chilling second. He registered my location, the folding chair, the coat rack, and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was not a nod of acknowledgement. It was a nod of confirmation. "This is where you belong. You understand." Then he turned back to the photographer, the smile reappearing as if switched on by a dimmer. The music swelled, shifting from the generic Vivaldi to the unmistakable canon. Elowen appeared at the end of the aisle. She was, objectively, stunning. A vision in couture lace, backlit by the blazing sun reflecting off the lake, creating a halo effect that the photographer was no doubt ecstatic about. She was surrounded by a phalanx of 6 bridesmaids in identical, shimmering blush-pink silk dresses. They were a team of smiling, uniformly beautiful women who had been her friends, her sorority sisters, her echo chamber. As she glided forward on our father's arm, her eyes scanned the crowd. She smiled at cousins, at business partners, at her groom, Damian Keats, who waited at the altar with a proprietary smirk that looked painfully rehearsed. Her gaze passed over the back row, it brushed past me, hesitated for the briefest fraction of a second, a tiny, almost imperceptible falter in her step, and then moved on. There was no flicker of recognition, no shock, no sisterly concern. It was the look one gives a piece of furniture that is slightly out of place, a fleeting annoyance before focusing back on the main event. I was a stranger at my own sister's wedding. My phone felt heavy as lead in my clutch, a single, silent vibration, a calendar reminder. 5:40 p.m., Elowen's ceremony, as if I could forget. I am the head of strategy at Norcrest Meridian, our family company. Our name is on the letterhead, on the frosted glass doors of our high-rise office in the city. Or rather, my father's name is. I am the one who works in the shadows, the one who runs the financial models, vets the acquisition targets, and identifies the rot. And there was so much rot. Norcrest Meridian was currently in the final, delicate stages of a merger with Vesper Ridge Capital, a massive private equity firm. It was a deal I had structured, a deal I had fought for, a deal that was supposed to be my triumph, my proof of value. Instead, it was becoming my execution. This wedding wasn't just a wedding, it was a public relations event, a celebration of the new, simplified hierarchy. Elowen, the brand muse, was the beautiful, soft face of the future. I was the sharp, difficult past, being quietly archived. A rustle of silk, my Aunt Josephine, my father's sister, slid into the row in front of mine, though her assigned seat was surely closer to the altar. She was a woman built of angles and anxieties, held together by hairspray and family loyalty. She didn't turn around. She merely leaned back, her perfume, a heavy, suffocating gardenia, washing over me. "Rhea," she whispered, her voice a dry, papery rasp. Such a shame about the seating, but really, what did you expect? After everything? I said nothing. My silence was a wall she immediately tried to scale. "You should learn to be more appreciative," she hissed, the words sharp and low, meant to sting. "Family is family. You do well to remember that if you want to keep your job after the merger." The threat was as bald as the enormous, cushion-cut diamond on her finger. Know your place, or be replaced. Her words were the final push, the confirmation I didn't know I needed. I slipped my hand into my clutch, my fingers, steady and cold, found the smooth glass of my phone. I didn't look down. My eyes remained fixed on the ceremony, on Elowen and my father standing at the altar. I unlocked the screen by touch, my thumb finding the familiar icon of the audio recorder app. I opened it. The small digital red record button pulsed on the screen, waiting. I didn't press it, not yet. But I looked at the time displayed at the top, 5:42 p.m. I thought of the clause I had found, buried on page 314 of the Vesper Ridge merger agreement, a document so dense it was practically unreadable. Section 812, Ethics and Conduct of Controlling Shareholders. It stated that any documented public act of moral turpitude, bad faith, or intentional emotional distress by a controlling shareholder, my father, or a named executive, which I barely still was, in a public event environment, could trigger an immediate, third-party ethics review and a potential, temporary reallocation of voting rights to the acquiring party's proxy. My father, in his monumental arrogance, had signed it without reading the fine print I had insisted Vesper Ridge's counsel include. He thought public event meant a shareholder meeting or an SEC filing. I knew the definition was broader. I knew it meant any event with a guest list, a photographer, and a public-facing facade. Like a wedding. I was so focused on the app, on the crushing weight of the moment, that I didn't notice him until he was right beside me. He hadn't walked down the aisle. He seemed to have materialized from the shadows near the coat rack. He was tall, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that was far too severe for a wedding guest. He leaned in, his proximity startling in the hushed chapel. Yet his presence was oddly calming, not threatening. He smelled faintly of bergamot and clean linen, a stark contrast to the cloying orchids. His voice was a low whisper, meant only for me, cutting cleanly through the string music. "Act like you're with me." It wasn't a question. It was a soft-spoken command, an offer. I looked up. He was younger than I'd first thought, perhaps my age, with sharp features and eyes that were a startling, intelligent gray. He held his arm out, elbow bent, a classic, gentlemanly gesture that was completely at odds with our location by the exit doors. A slight, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. As he moved, the light caught his lapel. No boutonniere. He wasn't a guest. He was something else. The effect was instantaneous and seismic. The videographer, who had been focused on a wide shot of Elowen and her groom, caught the movement in his periphery. His camera, mounted on a heavy shoulder rig, swung smoothly, the red recording light, a single, malevolent eye, fixed on us. The photographer's assistant, a young woman with a second camera, spotted the videographer's movement and pivoted as well, raising her own lens. Click, whir, click. In the span of 3 seconds, I was transformed. I was no longer the discarded sister by the coats. I was the subject. I was the woman being escorted by a handsome, mysterious man. I was, suddenly, an event. I looked at the offered arm. I looked at the intelligent gray eyes. He wasn't saving me. He was using me. And in that, we were perfectly aligned. This was a move on a board I hadn't even realized was fully set. He was offering me a piece, a promotion from a forgotten pawn to a far more strategic player. Across the aisle, my Aunt Josephine had turned, her face a mask of confusion and raw suspicion. From the altar, my father had noticed the camera's move. His smile tightened at the edges, his eyes narrowing. I took a slow, deliberate breath, tasting the orchids and the polish and the sudden sharp tang of opportunity. I nodded, just once. I placed my hand on his forearm. The wool of his suit was fine and strong beneath my fingers. "All right," I whispered back, my voice steady for the first time all day. "Let's start." He didn't lead me to the family row. That would have been a confrontation. This was more subtle. He guided me past it, past the confused, whispering looks of my aunts and cousins, and into a reserved row just behind them, a row with a small, discreet, reserved vendor management plaque on the end. It was a seat with a perfect, unobstructed view of the altar and the family. He seated me, then sat beside me, as if this had been the plan all along. The cameras, now satisfied that this small mystery was resolved, turned back to the altar just as the officiant began to speak. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." My hand went back into my clutch. My thumb found the smooth, cool screen. 5:44 p. I pressed the red button. The digital timer began to tick upward. 0 hussars. The game had begun. The officiant cleared his throat, a sound amplified by the discreet microphone on his lapel. "Marriage," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "is the sacred union of two souls, but it is also the joining of two families, a testament to the bonds of loyalty, trust, and shared history." A ripple of appreciative murmurs went through the guests. I watched my father, Arthur Calder, place a hand on Elowen's shoulder. It was a gesture of profound paternal love, perfectly framed for the cameras. Trust. The word echoed in the glass chapel. A hollow chime. The Calder family name is synonymous with Norcrest Meridian. We hold a 51% controlling stake in the data analytics and strategic consulting firm my grandfather founded. For decades, the Calder name meant integrity, precision, and an almost fanatical devotion to the truth of the numbers. My father changed that. He kept the reputation but hollowed out the foundation, replacing it with a lustrous, marketable facade. That facade was currently standing at the altar, radiant in white. Elowen was our brand muse. That was the official, cloying term my father coined. Her face, framed by soft blonde hair, graced the cover of our annual reports. Her curated Instagram feed was a mosaic of charity galas, sailing trips with clients, and artistic shots of our gleaming office headquarters. The message was clear. Norcrest Meridian is not a cold, calculating data firm. It's a lifestyle. It's effortless, beautiful, and young. It's Elowin. I am the one who made the numbers work. For 10 years. I'd lived in the engine room of the company, the windowless interior office where the real work was done. I built the predictive models that landed us the Kensington account. I architected the data security protocols that became our industry standard. I put in the 100-hour weeks, fueled by stale coffee and the quiet, fierce pride of building something real, something that would last. I was the architect of the company's substance. Elowin was the wallpaper. The officiant continued. In their life together, may Damien and Elowin always be guided by honesty. Honesty. 3 months ago, I was summoned to the main boardroom. It was after hours. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city glittering like a field of scattered diamonds. My father was at the head of the long mahogany table. Damien Keats, Elowin's then-fiancé and our head of business development, sat at his right hand. "Rhea," my father began, steepling his fingers. He didn't make eye contact. He was studying the grain of the wood. "As you know, the Vesper Ridge merger is entering its final, most delicate phase. It's all about image now, confidence, the human touch. Our Q3 performance metrics are the only human touch they should care about," I said. "And they're up 18%, a projection I personally guaranteed." Damien let out a soft, condescending chuckle. Rhea, always the numbers. What your father is saying is that the market needs to see the future of Norcrest. Vesper Ridge is investing in a vision." He leaned forward, his expensive tie sliding across the polished table. "And that vision needs a younger, softer image at the helm." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as broken glass. I was being erased. "Effective immediately," my father said, finally looking at me, his eyes flat and devoid of sentiment. "We're dissolving the executive board in its current configuration. We'll be restructuring post-merger. For now, you'll retain your title, of course, head of strategy, for continuity." It was a cage disguised as a compliment. I kept the title on my business card, but my access was severed. The next morning, my credentials for the Tier 1 strategic server were denied. My keycard no longer worked for the executive wing. I was locked out of the very architecture I had built, left with a meaningless title and an office that suddenly felt like a tomb. The rumor mill, lubricated by the hushed whispers of ambitious junior partners, churned out the truth within a week. The new chief financial officer, post-merger, would be Damien Keats, my job, the one I had been groomed for since I was a child, the one my grandfather had promised me. Damien, a man whose primary skill was his golf handicap and his ability to flatter my father, was going to be handed the keys to the kingdom. Elowin would get a seat on the new board, a ceremonial position as brand ambassador, the perfect power couple to represent the new, hollowed-out Norcrest Meridian. The officiant smiled. And now, a reading about commitment. My commitment had driven me back to the office late one Tuesday night, 6 weeks ago. I used an old system backdoor I'd built years before, a forgotten fire escape in the digital fortress. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just checking, a gnawing, visceral sense that something was fundamentally wrong. It's always in the footnotes, in the supplemental expense reports. That's where you find the rot. I found it in the compliance audits for our government contracts. They were too clean. The numbers were perfect, the margins exact, with none of the usual messy fluctuations of a real-world project. They had been polished, the data smoothed over to present a flawless picture of efficiency. It was subtle, elegant fraud. And then I found the payments. A series of large recurring wire transfers to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. Stonebell Analytics. The invoices were vague. Strategic advisory services. Market penetration analysis. But they were duplicates. The same work, the same project codes, had been invoiced by one of our legitimate, long-term partners. We were paying twice for the same service. once to a real company, and once to a ghost. The signatory on every single Stonebell payment authorization was Damian Keats. I spent the next 3 nights tracing Stonebell Analytics. It was a shell company, incorporated in Delaware, with a mailing address that led to a mailbox rental store in a strip mall. The corporate registration documents listed a single director, a name I didn't recognize, but a deeper dive into property records linked that name to the purchase of a condominium in a luxury high-rise. The down payment for that condo had been paid from a holding company controlled by Damian Keats. He wasn't just going to be the new CFO, he was already robbing the place blind. My first instinct was to go to my father, but I knew how that would end. He would praise my diligence, express his shock and disappointment in Damian, and then he would bury it. He would bury it so deep it would never see the light of day, because exposing Damian would scuttle the Vesper Ridge deal, and my father wanted this deal more than he wanted integrity, more than he wanted the truth, more than he wanted his own daughter. So I went another way. Vesper Ridge, like all major private equity firms, had an anonymous ethics hotline for their portfolio companies, a digital tip line for reporting fraud and malfeasance. I compiled everything: the polished compliance reports, the duplicate invoices, the wire transfer records, the corporate registration for Stonebell Analytics, the property records for the condo. I encrypted it, bundled it, and sent it into the void, with no name and no return address. For weeks, nothing happened. The merger plans continued. The wedding invitations went out. I began to think it had been for nothing, that my evidence had been buried in some digital slush pile. And then, 2 weeks ago, a revised merger agreement was circulated for final review. It was a formality, pages and pages of legalese, but I read every word, and there it was, a new clause, tucked away in a dense addendum. Section 812. The ethics clause. It was so specific, so tailored, that I knew. They had received my package. They were investigating. But they couldn't act without compromising the deal themselves. Not unless the malfeasance became public and undeniable. They needed a trigger, a public act. My plan began to form. A cold, clear crystal lattice in the chaos of my mind. I needed a stage. I needed a captive audience of stakeholders and business partners. I needed cameras, microphones, and a flawless performance of the united Calder family to serve as the backdrop for its own implosion. I needed an event where my father's public hypocrisy and Damian's smug deceit would be on full display. An event he couldn't control, where his performance of the loving patriarch would be his undoing. Elowyn's wedding was perfect. At the altar, my sister turned slightly to adjust her veil. Her eyes met Damian's, and she gave him a small, trusting smile. She had no idea she was a prop, the centerpiece in a multi-million-dollar corporate theater. She was the beautiful, innocent justification for my exile and Damian's ascent. I felt a pang of something, a ghost of sisterly affection from a long-forgotten childhood, but it passed. She had made her choice, allied herself with them. She had watched them sideline me, erase me, and she had said nothing. Her silence was her complicity. The officiant beamed at the guests. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" My father stepped forward, his voice thick with performative emotion. "Her mother and I do." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. My mother has been dead for 20 years. Clarissa, my stepmother, merely smirked from the front row, but the guests sighed. The photographer's shutter clicked, and the beautiful, fraudulent story was captured for posterity. My phone, still recording in my clutch, captured it too. The lie, the performance, the public act. The stage was set, the actors were in place, the audience was rapt, and I, the ghost in the machine, was about to rewrite the ending. The officiant was droning on about two becoming one, a seamless, practiced monologue that required no audience participation. The guests were respectfully silent, their attention fixed forward. In this vacuum of sound, every whisper, every rustle, felt amplified. We sat in the vendor management row, a position that was both invisible and offered a panoptic view. The stranger beside me did not watch the altar. He watched the room. After a long, assessing minute, he leaned in, his shoulder just brushing mine. His voice was barely a breath. "Name's Cass." He said it without looking at me, his gaze fixed on the back of my father's head in the front row. I kept my own eyes forward, focused on Elowen's veil, a sea of white tulle. I gave a short nod, not trusting my voice. My gaze flickered down to his lapel, where he'd been given a vendor pass. It was attached to a lanyard tucked partially into his suit pocket. A small laminated card read, "Lakeshore Hall. Vendor. Cass. AV Director." It was convincing, but as he shifted, his jacket cuff rode up, revealing his wrist. He wasn't wearing a watch. He was wearing a black, silicone fiber wristband with a small, embedded silver chip. It wasn't the flimsy paper band the other vendors wore. It was a high-level data access credential. I'd seen them before, worn by the penetration testers Vesper Ridge had sent to audit our servers. My heart didn't stop. It just shifted into a different, harder rhythm. A cold, clinical understanding began to dawn. As if sensing my realization, Cass leaned in again, his words precisely timed to the swell of the string quartet. "I represent a party with a significant stake in tonight's outcome." The carefully chosen words, party, stake, outcome, were not the words of a wedding technician. They were the words of Section 812. They were the words of the anonymous ethics complaint. He wasn't here to manage the microphones. He was here to manage the fallout. He was the buyer's man. I finally understood. Vesper Ridge hadn't just inserted a clause. They had inserted an agent. They had embedded their own auditor, their own investigator, right into the heart of the celebration, masquerading as the man who controlled the lights and sound. My anonymous tip hadn't been a shot in the dark. It had been the flare that guided in the insertion team, and he had just identified me as his asset on the ground. He turned his head fully to me for the first time. His gray eyes were analytical, devoid of pity. "Your seating assignment was informative. My client prefers to avoid ambiguity. So, Ms. Calder, do you intend to suffer through this, or do you intend to collaborate?" It was the coldest, most direct question I had ever been asked. Suffer, collaborate, a binary choice. He was offering me a knife and asking if I was going to fall on it or use it. "Collaborate," I whispered back, my voice surprisingly steady. The chill in my own tone matched his. "But no blood. I'm not burning the company down. I'm fumigating." A flicker of, not approval, but acknowledgement. My client's goals are aligned. They are not in the business of buying damaged goods. They are in the business of protecting their investment from compromised management. "Damian Keats," I said, a statement, not a question. "Among others," Cass replied. He subtly pulled his phone from his breast pocket, angling the screen away from the aisle. It wasn't showing a text message. It was showing a schematic, a blueprint of the hall. "The officiant's mic is on a dedicated, secure channel. I'm recording it directly." He tapped the screen. "The microphones on the lectern for the reception speeches are also on my feed. The lobby camera is high definition and networked. And the main projector," he tapped a box labeled Ballroom, "has 3 inputs. The wedding slideshow is on A. I have admin control of B and C from this device." He had just shown me his entire arsenal. He controlled what was heard, what was seen, and what would be shown. He wasn't just an observer. He was the conductor. "What do you need?" he asked, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I have what you need," I countered. "The proof? You have the access? I have the payload. I've seen the data you sent. It's good. It's the reason I'm here. But it's financial data. It's complex. To trigger Section 812, we need it to be public and undeniable. We need the fraud. And we need the Bad Faith Act to happen in the same public space." "Stonebell Analytics," I whispered. I mapped the money flow, from Norcrest, through the shell, to Damian's personal holding company. It's not just numbers. It's a visual, a map, It's simple enough for a 6-year-old to understand, and it's on my phone. Can you get it to me? Bluetooth is enabled on my device. It's named RC Strat. Cass didn't miss a beat. He tapped his phone, and a searching for devices icon appeared. He navigated as if checking an email. Found, sending pairing request. My phone vibrated silently in my clutch. I unlocked it, my eyes still on the altar, where Elowyn and Damien were now lighting a unity candle, their hands clasped together over the flame, a perfect, united front. I accepted the pair, connected to Cass of Secure. I navigated to my encrypted files, selected the infographic I had spent 3 nights perfecting, a clean, brutal flowchart of theft, and hit Send. File. Stonebell Flowchart, PDF, sending. They're about to be pronounced, Cass said, his phone still in his hand. We'll be moving to the reception hall in 5. This is our window. File sent. He pocketed his phone. I have it. Input B is now loaded. At the altar, the officiant raised his hands. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. The string quartet exploded into a triumphant, soaring peace. The guests erupted in applause, a wave of sound and joy that I felt only as a vibration. Elowyn and Damien kissed, a long, cinematic embrace for the cameras. My father turned to the crowd, beaming, accepting the congratulations as if he himself had accomplished a great feat. The recessional began. Guests started to stand, to turn, to murmur and smile at each other. The tension broke, replaced by the polite, celebratory shuffle toward the exit and the promise of cocktails. As I stood, a shadow fell over me. It was one of Damien's groomsmen, a man named Tyler, who worked under Damien in business development. He was broad, handsome in a brutish way, and had the entitled air of someone who had never been told no. He was smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Rhea," he said, his voice a low, friendly growl, deliberately blocking my path into the aisle. "Good to see you. Almost didn't recognize you. Way back here." "Tyler," I said, my voice neutral. "Listen," he leaned in, his smile tightening into something else, his champagne-scented breath hot on my cheek. "Just wanted to say, Elowyn is so happy, Damien is so happy. It's a really, really important day for the family, for the company." He stressed the word. "It would be a shame if anything unprofessional happened to ruin it. You understand? Don't be selfish. Don't cause a scene." It was a perfectly delivered threat, wrapped in the language of concern. I saw the wedding videographer out of the corner of my eye, panning his lens across the smiling, departing guests. He was capturing the crowd, and we were part of it. I didn't answer Tyler. I just looked at him. Before I could, Cass stepped up beside me, not in a threatening way, but in a proprietary one. He smiled warmly at Tyler, the perfect AV guy making sure a guest was okay. "Is there a problem here, sir? Can I help you find the cocktail hour?" Tyler's eyes darted to Cass, dismissing him as staff. "We're fine. This is a family matter." "Of course," Cass said, his smile unwavering. He held his phone in his hand, angled down, but the screen was live. He tapped the stop icon on his audio recorder app, saved the file, and then tapped his earpiece, a tiny, clear plastic device I hadn't even noticed. "Unit 1, lobby is clear. Send them through, and get a focus shot on guest Tyler, the groomsman in gray. Tag him." Tyler's smile vanished. He heard the earpiece. He saw the professionalism. He didn't understand what was happening, but he understood he was suddenly out of his depth. Cass looked at me, ignoring Tyler completely. "Ms. Calder, shall we?" He offered his arm again. As I took it, I saw Cass's thumb swipe on his phone screen. A small green icon appeared. File. Groomsman threat 5:58 p.m. WAV. Status. Uploaded. He'd been recording the whole time. The threat. The bad faith act. "Capturing," Cass said to me, so low only I could hear. "They're making it easy." I took a deep breath. the stale, floral air of the chapel filling my lungs. The music was bright. The guests were laughing. My father was leading the victorious procession toward the ballroom. The wheels were turning, and they were picking up speed. The transition from the glass chapel to the grand ballroom of Lakeshore Hall was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Guests flowed through the wide corridors, their laughter echoing off the polished marble floors. A river of silk, cologne, and champagne. The string quartet had been replaced by a live jazz band, playing a smooth, unobtrusive rhythm that served as the perfect soundtrack for networking disguised as celebration. Cass and I moved with the current, our shared silence a pocket of calm in the swirling noise. He walked beside me, not touching, but close enough that I felt like we were in our own invisible perimeter. The ballroom was breathtaking, a cavern of soft, honey-gold light. Towering floral centerpieces bled orchids and roses onto white linen tablecloths. A massive, multi-tiered wedding cake stood like a monument in one corner. At the far end, a giant LED screen, currently displaying a tasteful looping monogram of E&D, was flanked by two smaller screens, my canvas. We found our assigned table. It was, again, strategically placed. Not in the back with the service staff, but not with the family either. It was a table of secondary business partners, people important enough to invite, but not important enough to sit with my father. It gave us a clear view of the head table, the dance floor, and the lectern set up for speeches. As the guests settled, the MC, a man with a dazzling smile and the slick, confident patter of a game show host, took to the lectern. The jazz band softened to a barely audible hum. "Good evening, everyone, and a huge welcome to the magnificent wedding reception of Damien and Elowyn Keats," he boomed, his voice echoing slightly. A wave of applause. I've known the Calder family for years, and if there's one word that comes to mind when I think of them, it's unity. Such a strong, loving, and completely united family. Let's hear it for the Caters. Another round of applause, this one more polite, from the head table. My father raised his glass in a gesture of magnanimous acknowledgement. I felt Cass shift beside me. A minute adjustment, his gaze sweeping the room. My stepmother, Clarissa, chose that moment. She leaned back in her chair at the head table, catching my eye from across the two intervening tables. Her diamonds glittered in the soft light. She smiled, a small, conspiratorial smile, and leaned toward my Aunt Josephine, who was seated next to her. She didn't whisper. She pitched her voice to the precise frequency that would carry across the ambient chatter, a targeted acoustic missile. "You know," Clarissa said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, "seeing Rhea at that little table over there, it's for the best. Sitting alone suits her. Don't you think?" A few heads at the family table turned in my direction. My Aunt Josephine let out a short, sharp titter of laughter. Another cousin smirked into his napkin. It wasn't loud, but it was a distinct, contained ripple of shared amusement at my expense. It was a public branding, a confirmation of my status as the outcast, delivered as a piece of casual, witty observation. The cruelty was in its casualness. I didn't react. I kept my expression placid, my spine straight. I took a slow sip of ice water, the cold glass a welcome anchor, but inside my clutch, my phone was still recording. It captured the MC's praise of our unity. It captured Clarissa's voice, clear as a bell. It captured the subsequent ripple of laughter, all of it, a perfect, self-contained exhibition of intentional emotional distress. My mind flashed back to the ceremony, not even an hour ago, to Damien, standing at the altar, his eyes finding the main camera lens as he repeated his vows. When he got to the line about cherishing you with all honesty, in all things, for all of our days, he'd made the slightest of movements, a subtle, almost imperceptible dip of his eyelid, a wink for the camera, a wink to his audience, a little piece of showmanship that said, "Look at me. I'm the perfect husband." He was performing his honesty. The gesture was so arrogant, so brazen, It had taken my breath away. He wasn't just a thief. He was an artist of deceit. My phone vibrated with an incoming message. I glanced down discreetly. It was Cass. The screen simply said, "They're setting up for family photos near the terrace." I looked up. Sure enough, the photographer was directing the bridal party toward the large glass doors that led to a stone terrace overlooking the lake. The light was perfect for the golden hour shots. "Go," Cass murmured, without looking at me. "Be seen, be present." I stood and made my way toward the group, my movements measured. My father, Damien, Elowyn, Clarissa, the bridesmaids and groomsmen. They were arranging themselves in a complex, shifting formation. I approached the edge of the group, expecting the photographer to wave me in. He didn't. Instead, two of Elowyn's bridesmaids, a blonde named Jessica and a brunette named Lauren, executed a maneuver with the seamless precision of a military drill, as the photographer called out, "Okay, let's get the bride's sister in here." They shifted. Jessica stepped back, ostensibly to adjust the train of Elowyn's dress, her voluminous skirt creating a wall of silk. Lauren stepped forward to laugh at something Damien said, positioning herself perfectly so that I was now behind her, completely obscured from the camera's view. It was a flawless execution. I was boxed out, erased from the family portrait without a single word being spoken. I saw Elowyn watch it happen. Our eyes met over Jessica's shoulder. She saw me standing there, excluded. She saw the maneuver, and she turned back to the camera and smiled. I started to turn away, the public humiliation a hot flush on my cheeks, when a waiter, a young man who looked no older than 19, hurried past. He was carrying a tray of red wine. As he passed me, he stumbled, his ankle seeming to twist on nothing. The tray tilted precariously. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he began, as a full glass of deep red Merlot slid from the tray and emptied itself down the front of my pale silver dress. The wine was shockingly cold, then instantly warm against my skin. A dark, ugly stain bloomed across the silk, a splash pattern of crimson aggression. The waiter was mortified, stammering apologies, dabbing at the stain with a cocktail napkin which only made it worse. "It's fine," I said, my voice tight. "It was an accident." But it wasn't. As I looked up from the spreading stain, I saw my sister Elowyn again. She was watching the whole thing. The family photo was momentarily forgotten. She wasn't laughing. She was just smiling. A thin, sharp, satisfied smile. It was the smile of a queen watching a minor courtier receive a deserved punishment. It was a smile of victory. This was her wedding. This was her family now, and I had no place in it. Then Cass was there. He appeared at my side with a clean white linen napkin from a nearby table. "Here," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the waiter's panicked apologies. He handed me the napkin and spoke to the young man. "It's all right. Go get your manager. We'll handle this." The waiter fled, grateful. I pressed the linen to my dress, a futile gesture. The stain was deep, permanent. Cass leaned close, his back to the family photo session, shielding me from their view. "Deep breath, Calder," he murmured, his voice a low, steadying hum. "This is just noise. It's what they do. Don't let it distract you from the signal." He looked at his wrist, where the security band was, a habit, as if checking a watch that wasn't there. 10 more minutes. The words sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, clearing my head, washing away the sting of humiliation. 10 minutes. Everything hinged on the next 10 minutes. I nodded, took the deep breath he'd ordered, and turned my back on the ruined dress, on the family portrait I would never be a part of. We walked back to our table. As we sat, my father strode to the lectern, a glass of champagne in his hand. He tapped the microphone, the sound booming through the ballroom. The band quieted. "A few words, if I may," he announced, his voice filled with the easy confidence of a man who owned the room. "I just want to say how proud I am today. Seeing my beautiful daughter Elowyn marry a man as sharp and capable as Damien, it gives me such confidence in the future of our family, and the future of our company." He paused for effect, beaming. Many of you know we're on the cusp of a new era at Norcrest Meridian, a bright new partnership, and I can tell you all, as friends and partners. He leaned into the mic, a conspiratorial twinkle in his eye. Get ready to celebrate with us again, because that deal is going to be locked tight and signed by Monday morning. The future is secure. A smattering of cheers and applause, especially from the tables filled with our senior partners and investors. My eyes met Cass's. His face was impassive, but I saw it, a glint of steel. He subtly brought up his phone under the table. I saw him type a quick note into a secure messaging app, his thumb flying across the screen. I could read the words upside down. 1948. A. Calder. Public forward-looking statement re. Vesper Ridge merger timeline. Material non-public information disclosed in a public forum. Violation of SEC fair disclosure regulations. He added another line. Good. My father had just handed us another weapon, a big one. In his drunken, arrogant desire to preen in front of his friends, he had committed a securities violation on a hot mic. My dress was ruined. My family had publicly disowned me, but they had also just sealed their own fate. I discreetly pulled out my own phone. My fingers were cold, but they didn't shake. I opened a new message to Cass. Projector input. 8:30 p.m. Sharp. I hit send. He glanced at his phone, read my message, and gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. 10 more minutes. No. Now it was 9. The clock was ticking. The main course was served. A perfectly seared filet mignon on a bed of truffle-infused risotto. The honey gold light of the chandeliers made everything gleam. From the condensation on the wine glasses to the diamonds on my stepmother's wrist, on the main LED screen, input A was in full effect, a slideshow, meticulously curated by Elowen, played on a gentle loop. There she was at age 5, laughing on a swing set. There she was at 16, in a prom dress. There she was, graduating from college, arm in arm with our father. It was a perfect, sanitized history. Each photo a testament to a charmed, effortless life. Every image of me had been carefully cropped out. The jazz band took a break, and the slick MC returned to the lectern. And now, folks, we come to a very special part of the evening, the speeches, a chance for the family to share their love and best wishes for our happy couple. He held up a small white card. We'll be hearing from the father of the bride, Arthur Calder, the mother of the bride, Clarissa Calder, and the best man, Tyler Vance. He smiled out at the crowd. The list was read. My name was not on it. I was not a speaker. I was not, in any official capacity, part of the family narrative. My father gave a polished, witty speech about watching his little girl grow up, sprinkling in just enough business-friendly anecdotes to remind everyone in the room of his power. Clarissa followed with a saccharine toast that was more about her own role as a devoted maternal figure than about Elowen. Then Tyler, the groomsman who had threatened me, gave a predictable speech full of stale jokes about Damien's golf game. When he finished, the MC stepped back up. Wonderful, wonderful. Let's give them all a huge round of applause. The band will be starting up again in just a few. This was it, my cue. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished floor. The sound was small, but in the expectant pause, it felt like a crack of thunder. A few heads at nearby tables turned. I saw Cass, still at our table, subtly tap his phone screen awake. I started walking toward the lectern. It wasn't a long walk, but it felt like miles. Every eye in the room followed me. I could feel the confusion, the disapproval. I walked past the family table. My father's smile froze on his face, turning brittle. Clarissa's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. Elowen just watched me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. Her expression was a mask of cold apprehension. I reached the small set of stairs leading to the stage. The MC, flustered, stepped in front of the lectern to block me. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. The family speeches are concluded." I gave him a calm, cool smile. "It's all right. I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm the bride's sister. I moved past him as if he were a piece of furniture and stood behind the microphone. The silence in the room was now absolute. It was heavy, thick with tension. Just 1 minute, I said into the microphone, my voice clear and even, amplified throughout the cavernous ballroom. For my sister and me. I looked directly at Elowen. Her lips were pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Damien. His face was a thundercloud of rage. He leaned forward, catching the eye of a technician in the AV booth at the back of the room, and made a sharp, frantic gesture across his throat. Cut it! Cut the mic! Now! The technician, a kid wearing a Lakeshore Hall polo shirt, fumbled with his control board, but nothing happened. My microphone remained live, a low hum of active power filling the silence. The AV system, it seemed, was experiencing a slight technical difficulty, a difficulty named Cass, who I knew was sitting with his phone in his hand, his thumb resting on the master control app, ensuring my channel stayed open. I let the silence stretch for another beat, letting the tension build to an unbearable peak. I glanced at the digital clock on the lectern. 8:29:57, 8:29:58, 8:29:59. On the massive LED screen behind me, a photo of Elowen as a toddler, chasing a butterfly in a sun-drenched field, faded to black. And then, input B went live. It wasn't a photo, it was a document. Stark white text on a black background. At the top, in a clean, bold font, were the words, Stonebell Analytics, Schedule of Payments, Norcrest Meridian, ACCT 74B31. Below it, a spreadsheet, a simple, elegant ledger of dates, invoice numbers, and payment amounts. A running total at the bottom showed a figure just north of $3 million, and in the final column, labeled Authorization, was a name, repeated over and over, Keats, Damien. Next to each name was a perfect, high-resolution scan of his digital signature, the same arrogant, looping signature that was on their marriage certificate. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. It was a physical sound, a sudden, sharp intake of hundreds of breaths. The only other sound was the incidental clink of a fork against a plate as someone, somewhere, froze in the middle of a bite. From the head table, I heard Damien's chair scrape violently as he half stood. Elowen stared at the screen, her face utterly blank with shock, her mind clearly struggling to process what she was seeing. I leaned into the microphone. My voice didn't waver. It was as calm and clear as the numbers on the screen behind me. My brother-in-law, Damien, spoke of honesty in his vows, I said, my words dropping like stones into a silent pool. I was so moved by his commitment to the truth. I realized that the greatest wedding gift I could offer my sister is a marriage that begins with that same spirit of absolute clarity. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Transparency, I said, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of our company's partners and investors, is the vow I'm choosing to make. That broke the spell. Turn it off! The voice was a raw, guttural roar. It was my father. He was on his feet, his face purple with rage, his carefully constructed facade of the benevolent patriarch utterly shattered. He pointed a shaking finger at the AV booth, then at me. Turn that damn thing off now! Someone shut her up! The main videographer, a true professional, didn't flinch. His camera, which had been focused on me, swiveled smoothly on his shoulder rig, zooming in to capture a perfect, high-definition close-up of my father's contorted, screaming face. The red light on his camera was a glowing beacon of confirmation. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. It was done. The mechanism had been triggered. The trap had sprung. Section 812. The Ethics Clause. It was a beautiful piece of legal architecture, and it required two distinct, publicly documented elements to be activated. First, the evidence of malfeasance. That was currently displayed 30 feet high behind me, an undeniable ledger of theft signed by the groom. Second, a public act of bad faith or obstruction of transparency by a controlling shareholder, my father, in his blind rage, had just provided that, on a hot mic, recorded in broadcast quality from multiple angles. Evidence and obstruction. Check. And mate, the ballroom was a tomb, frozen in the echo of my father's scream. His face was a grotesque mask of apoplectic rage, his finger still pointing at me, trembling. The 2 security guards he had summoned were halfway down the aisle, hesitating, their expressions caught between duty and the dawning, awful realization that they were bit players in a drama far above their pay grade. A new voice sliced through the tension, not from the lectern, but from the floor. It was calm, amplified, and steeped in absolute authority. "Gentlemen," Cass had risen from our table. He had picked up the MC's discarded wireless microphone and was walking slowly, deliberately, toward the stage. The security guards stopped dead. Every eye in the room pivoted to him. "Please stand by," Cass advised the guards, his voice as neutral and cool as a legal brief. "This is not a family dispute. This is a corporate governance matter." He didn't join me on the stage but stood just beside it. A new center of gravity, the spotlight, still focused on me, caught him in its spill. "Who in the hell are you?" my father snarled, whirling on this new, unexpected variable. "Are you with her? I want you both out of here. This is a private party." "My name is Cashin Bylos," he said. The name meant nothing to them, but the way he said it carried the weight of a deposition. "I am not the AV director. I am independent investigative counsel, retained by Vesper Ridge Capital." A new kind of shock rippled through the room. This was not a family feud. This was the buyer, the investors at the minority partners tables, who collectively held 49% of Norcrest, sat bolt upright. Their demeanor shifted instantly from uncomfortable wedding guests to alert, calculating stakeholders. "I was assigned," Cass continued, his voice ringing with clarity, "to observe this event and audit persistent, anonymous reports of financial irregularities at Norcrest Meridian. However, events this evening have forced an acceleration of that timeline." My father's face, which had been purple with rage, began to drain of color. What reports? This is slander." "At 8:30 p.m., Mr. Calder," Cass said, "you stood at that lectern and publicly attempted to obstruct a presentation of evidence. In doing so, you triggered Section 8.12 of the merger agreement you signed 7 weeks ago." Cass raised his own phone, and the main screen behind me, the one still showing the Stonebell spreadsheet, flickered. It was replaced by a live mirror of Cass's phone screen. We all watched, in real time, as he composed a new email. The recipient list was a roll call of corporate power: Vesper Ridge Legal, Norcrest GC Office, Norcrest Minority Stakeholder Com. The subject line was brutal: formal notification, breach of agreement, Section 8.12, ethics and conduct. As of 8:31 p.m., Cass narrated, his thumb hovering over the send icon. "I am formally notifying all parties of this breach. The notification includes the full evidence packet, including the Stonebell Analytics data stream, metadata from the altered compliance reports, and the audio-visual recordings of Mr. Calder's public obstruction." He pressed send. The small digital whoosh sound was silent, but in our minds, it was a cannon shot. An email icon appeared on the screen. Time-stamped. Sent. 8:31 p.m. He had just filed the complaint, publicly, in front of 200 witnesses. "Evidence? Obstruction?" my father stammered, his bravado finally cracking, revealing the raw panic beneath. That's fabricated. It's a lie." "Is it?" Cass replied. The screen flickered again. The spreadsheet was gone, replaced by the flowchart I had built in the dead of night. The Stonebell flowchart, PDF. It was a stark, simple map of theft. Norcrest Meridian, Stonebell Analytics, Shell Corp. Damian Keats, Personal Holding Company. It showed the $3.1 million transfer. It showed the subsequent disbursements. 1.2 mm. Condo purchase. Delaware Trust, 445. $800K. Wire transfer. Cayman Act, 991. It was simple, it was clean, it was undeniable. At the head table, I watched Elowen. She stared at the screen, her brow furrowed in confusion, not yet understanding the scale, only the name. She turned to her new husband. Damien was no longer smirking. He was a statue of ash, his skin a waxy, greenish white. Elowen's voice was a broken whisper, but in the amplified, horrified silence, it carried clearly. "Stonebell? Damien? What is that?" She looked back at the screen, at the numbers. You told me Stonebell was the event planner's holding company. You said that was the deposit, for the flowers, for the catering." Damien didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stared, his mouth slack, his entire future imploding in real time on a 30-foot screen. My father, however, found his voice. It was the roar of a cornered animal. He slammed both fists on the head table, rattling plates and sending a champagne flute crashing to the floor. "This is a lie, a vicious, slanderous lie," he bellowed, pointing at me, at Cass, at the screen. "Security, I order you, get them out of my daughter's wedding, turn this off. This is a private family event, stop this." The videographer, bless his professional heart, kept rolling, panning smoothly from my father's screaming face back to Cass, who stood unmoved. "Thank you, Mr. Calder," Cass said, his voice dropping, forcing the room to lean in. "That is the second public act of obstruction. You've just solidified the breach for everyone to see." He held up a hand, silencing the whispers that had begun to swell. "For the benefit of the partners and investors in the room, I'll read from the clause you all ratified. Section 8.12, subsection B. In the event of a public act of bad faith, or the active obstruction of transparency related to a material investigation by a controlling shareholder, Vesper Ridge Capital reserves the right to call for an immediate, temporary transfer of all controlling shareholder voting rights to a neutral third-party proxy, pending an expedited audit, to protect the assets of the company from further compromise." He let the words land. "My client, Vesper Ridge, is invoking that right now." "You can't," Clarissa shrieked, finally finding her voice. "Our lawyers will—" "They are already aware, ma'am," Cass said. And the screen changed. Input C. It was a live video feed. A woman in a severe dark blue suit sat in a brightly lit office, a wall of legal books behind her. She looked severe, intelligent, and utterly unimpressed. A chyron appeared beneath her face. Anna Vane, General Counsel, Vesper Ridge Capital. "Good evening," Anna Vane said. Her voice, crisp and digital, filled the ballroom, a chilling intrusion of the boardroom into the party. "I apologize for this interruption. My name is Anna Vane. I can confirm that as of 8:32 p.m. My office has received Mr. Bylos's notification and the attached evidence packet. We have also been monitoring a live feed of this event and have personally witnessed the acts of obstruction by Mr. Arthur Calder." My father stared at the screen, dumbfounded. He was being watched. His own party was a deposition. "In accordance with Section 812, Vane continued, her voice a scalpel, Vesper Ridge, in conjunction with the Minority Stakeholder Committee, is exercising its proxy right. The Calder family's controlling vote at Norcrest Meridian is, as of this moment, suspended." Suspended. The word echoed. It was a coup d'etat. Vane's eyes on the screen seemed to find me at the lectern. "A stable transition is necessary to ensure continuity and secure company assets from further spoliation. An emergency virtual vote of the non-conflicted board members and the Vesper proxy has just concluded." In my hand, on the lectern, my phone buzzed. An email. I looked down. From Vane, Anna Avane at Vesperidge, com. Subject, Appointment, Acting Chief Operating Officer. Body, Ms. Calder. By unanimous vote of the minority stakeholders and the Vesper Ridge proxy, you are hereby appointed Acting Chief Operating Officer of Norcrest Meridian, effective immediately. Your full credentials and access will be reactivated within the minute. You are instructed to secure all relevant data, financial records, and physical assets. A full transition team will be at headquarters at 0800 on Monday. Congratulations. I read the words, Acting Chief Operating Officer. I looked up from the screen of my phone to the giant screen in the ballroom. Anna Vane gave a single, curt nod, as if acknowledging a transaction. Then I looked at my father. The rage was gone. It had evaporated, leaving behind a gray, hollow-eyed vacuum. The color, the power, the bluster, all of it had been sucked out of him. He finally understood. He saw the shape of the trap, the precision of its execution, the fact that he himself had armed it and then willingly walked right into it. The silence broke. It shattered. It didn't break with a scream, but with the explosive, sibilant roar of 200 people all whispering at once. It was the sound of reputations collapsing, of power shifting, of a dynasty ending. The guests were turning to each other, their faces alive with the raw, exhilarating shock of witnessing a public execution. The power, which had been so confidently held at the head table, had just been transferred, in its entirety, to the woman in the stained dress, standing alone at the microphone. The cacophony of whispers died down, not because of a command, but because of a movement. It was a single, fragile, and utterly captivating motion. From the wreckage of the head table, Elowyn was rising to her feet. Her couture dress, which had seemed so ethereal and untouchable, now looked like a heavy, tragic costume. She moved with a stiff, uncoordinated grace, her hands trembling so violently that the diamonds on her new wedding band blurred into a streak of light. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged from tears she hadn't yet allowed to fall. She looked not at Damien, not at our father, but at the lectern, at me. She began to walk. It was the same path I had taken, but her journey was infinitely longer. She was walking through the ruins of her own life. The guests parted for her, a silent, pitying sea. She reached the stage, her hand gripping the side of the lectern for support. I stepped back, ceding the space, ceding the microphone. The room held its breath. Elowyn took a shaky, ragged breath, and the microphone picked up the sound, amplifying her fragility across the silent ballroom. She began, her voice a raw, broken whisper. She stopped, swallowed, and tried again. I knew a part of it. The admission hung in the air, more shocking than the accusations. It was a confession. But to what? The room, which had been buzzing with speculation, went utterly still. Not the money, she clarified, shaking her head as if to clear it. Not Stonebell. I'd never heard that name until tonight. Her gaze found Damien, a look of such profound, wounded betrayal that he physically flinched. But the papers? She gestured vaguely toward the screen, which still displayed my damning flowchart. There were papers. A few weeks ago, after our engagement photo shoot. Her voice gained a sliver of strength as the memory took shape. We were at the studio. We were celebrating. Damien was on his tablet, and he said he had something for me to sign. He was smiling. He said it was a final form for the floral sponsor, a big orchid importer who was giving us a discount for the brand exposure. She looked out at the silent, watching faces, her own expression a mask of dawning, horrified comprehension. He said it was just a formality, a power of attorney, he called it, so his assistant could handle the delivery logistics without bothering me. It was a blank form. He just said to sign at the bottom, and they would fill in the details about the flowers later. She laughed, a short, sharp, hysterical sound that held no humor. A flower sponsorship. I was so happy about the wedding, so excited. I signed it, on his tablet, with a stylus. I signed a blank screen because I trusted him. I looked at my sister, the anger I had nursed for months, the cold, hard fury that had fueled this entire operation, simply dissolved. It evaporated, leaving behind a vast, aching pity. She wasn't a co-conspirator. She wasn't a rival who had bested me. She was a prop, a beautiful, smiling, perfectly decorated human shield, used by Damien and my father to legitimize their coup. They had put her face on the brochures and her signature on their fraudulent documents. They had leveraged her beauty and her trust, and in doing so, had made her complicit in her own husband's crimes. A murmur of doubt started to ripple through the audience. Was she telling the truth? Was this just a desperate attempt to save herself? Before the narrative could turn against her, Cass moved. He took the MC's microphone from the stand where he'd left it and spoke from the floor. "We can confirm Ms. Keats's account," he said, his voice a calm, factual anchor in the emotional storm. The guests quieted instantly, turning to him. The document Elowin is referring to was a broad, unrestricted power of attorney, granting Damien Keats full control over her financial and corporate interests, Cass explained. He pulled out his phone. The main screen behind Elowin changed again, displaying a dense block of legal text. However, the digital signature she provided has its own metadata, a digital footprint. He zoomed in on a section of the screen, showing lines of code and timestamps. The metadata shows that Ms. Keats's signature was captured at 4:17 p.m. on September 28th. The text of the power of attorney itself, however, was inserted into the document file at 11:52 p.m. that same night. The document structure was altered after the signature was applied and captured. He looked up from his phone, his gaze sweeping the room. In short, she signed a blank page. The fraudulent terms were added later. The metadata is immutable and proves it. That was the final blow, the technical, irrefutable confirmation. Elowin wasn't just telling a story. She was telling the truth. And with that truth, the social order of the room began to collapse. It started at a table of junior partners. One of them, a man in his late 40s, stood up, took his wife's arm, and with a quiet murmur of, "I think we should go," walked them to a different, empty table at the far side of the room. It was a small act, but it was a definitive one. It was an act of dissociation. Then another couple followed. Then a whole table of my father's old golfing buddies picked up their wine glasses and migrated away from the head table's orbit. It was a slow, silent, mass exodus. They weren't leaving the wedding. They were abandoning Damien and my father. They were creating a physical quarantine around the toxicity, a wide, empty moat of empty tables and chairs. From her seat, my stepmother, Clarissa, watched this happen, her face a mask of disbelief. Her social standing, the currency she valued above all else, was being devalued in real time. She slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to push her chair back, away from the table, away from our father. She clutched her small, diamond-encrusted purse to her chest, not like an accessory, but like a life raft. The only thing of value she had left, as the ship went down around her, she was shrinking into the shadows, trying to become invisible. My father did not move. He sat in his chair, a silent, rigid effigy of a powerful man. The main screen, no longer needed, had gone black, but its polished, dark surface acted as a mirror, reflecting a distorted fisheye image of the ballroom. In it, I could see his face, warped and elongated, a silent scream of impotent rage reflected back at him. He was a king alone in a ruined castle, with no one left to command. I walked over to Elowin, who was still standing at the lectern, trembling, looking small and lost on the stage. I put a hand on her arm. She flinched, then looked at me, her eyes swimming with 1,000 questions. "It's over," I said, my voice low, for her alone. "You don't have to stand here anymore." What do I do?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Rhea, what happens now?" I looked at her, at the ruins of her wedding day, at the man she had just married who was now a pariah, at the father who had used her as a pawn. The victory I had planned felt like ash in my mouth. This wasn't a triumph, it was a demolition, and now someone had to start cleaning up. "Your wedding," I said, my voice softer than I intended, "will not be the place where the rest of your life is buried. This ends tonight. For you. She searched my eyes, looking for the anger, the "I told you so," the years of resentment. She found none of it. All she found was a quiet, weary resolve. She nodded, a single, slow, accepting nod. It was the first honest moment that had passed between us in a decade. The whispers had just begun to swell, a chaotic, sibilant tide of rumor and shock. When a new sound cut through the room, it was abrupt, harsh, and final. A digital record scratch, the smooth, soulful jazz of the live band, which had been playing softly, sputtered and died mid-note. The DJ, who had been prepping his next set in the corner, looked up, his face a mask of confusion, tapping his silent console. And then the light changed. The warm, honey gold, forgiving light of the reception vanished, as if a switch had been thrown on the entire atmosphere. It was replaced by a stark, neutral, almost surgical white light, the chandeliers, which had glowed, now simply illuminated. Every flaw, every stunned face, every wine stain was thrown into sharp, unforgiving relief. It was no longer a party, it was an operating theater. On the main LED screen, Anna Vane's face reappeared. Her expression was unchanged, a mask of cold, corporate efficiency. She had been watching. She had been listening. Mr. Bylos. Her voice was a digital blade, cutting through the last vestiges of party chatter. The breach is confirmed. The proxy is executed. We cannot, however, wait until Monday. The risk of data spoliation is too high. We must formalize the transfer of operational control. Immediately. Understood. Ms. Vane, Cass replied from the floor, his voice calm. He turned and walked not to the stage, but to me. He was holding a sleek, dark gray tablet. He held it out. Ms. Calder. On the screen was a document. Interim Control and Transition Agreement. Vesper Ridge Capital, Norcrest Meridian. It was pages of dense legalese, but he had already scrolled to the final page. There was a single, yellow highlighted box. Signature, R. Calder, Acting Chief Operating Officer. We need your signature, Anna Vane's voice commanded from the screen, to legally effect the transfer of authority and to formally empower you to secure the premises and all data. Cass offered me a stylus. My hand was steady, but I was intensely aware of the 200 pairs of eyes watching me. I took the stylus. The glass was cool beneath my palm. I saw my father, still frozen at his table, his eyes wide, tracking the movement of the pen in my hand. He looked like a man watching someone sign his death warrant. I signed my name, Rhea Calder. The looping, familiar script felt alien, suddenly loaded with the weight of an entire corporation. I hit the confirm button. The signature is executed. Ms. Vane, Cass reported. Acknowledged, she replied. We are now submitting the agreement for ratification by the non-conflicted stakeholders. Mr. Bylos, please display the voting portal. Cass tapped his phone, and the main screen behind me changed. It was a simple, clean interface, a dashboard. Motion. Ratify interim transition agreement and appointment of R. Calder as acting COO. Voting in progress. To our partners and stakeholders in the room, Anna Vane's voice narrated, you should all be receiving a notification from the corporate governance app. Please cast your vote now. A new sound filled the room. The chime of dozens of phone notifications, all arriving at once, at the investors' tables. Men and women pulled out their phones. There was no deliberation, no discussion. It was a rout. Their fingers tapped their screens. On the main LED, a blue bar began to fill, racing from left to right. Voting in progress, 91%, 94%, 98.7%. Motion passed, 98.7% of non-conflicted shares in favor. It was done. The entire power structure of a 50-year-old company had been dismantled and rebuilt in the space of about 90 seconds. The motion carries, Vane stated, a flicker of something, not a smile, just finality, on her lips. The transfer is legally complete. Mr. Bylos, you may now execute the asset containment protocols. Executing now, Cass said. He looked down at his own phone, his thumbs moving with a speed that was hypnotic. He was no longer an investigator. He was an operator. The main screen changed again. It became a feed that I recognized. A dark mode admin panel from our own internal HR and IT systems. At the top, a search bar. User. Keats. Damien. We all watched. The entire room watched as a digital execution took place. A profile appeared. Damien's corporate headshot, his title, his department, and a series of green icons. Status. Active. CFO designate. Network access. Granted. Keycard access. All facilities. Granted. Secure server. Finance. Granted. Executing, Cass said again, to himself as much as to Vane. And the icons began to change, one by one, with a brutal, mechanical finality. A red X appeared. Status, suspended, pending investigation. A new red X. Network access, revoked. A new red X. Keycard access, all facilities, deactivated. A new red X. Secure server, finance, voked. A final line of text appeared, a cold, automated summary of the action. All pending tasks and permissions, Keats, D, rerouted to Calder, R, acting coup. Damien made a sound, a choked, involuntary gasp. He instinctively slapped his jacket pocket, where his wallet and his company keycard sat. A useless piece of plastic. He was, in every way that mattered to our world, a non-entity. The protocols are complete, Cass said. Excellent, Anna Vane replied. One final step. The screen changed for the last time. It was a new email, pre-drafted. The recipient list was terrifying in its scope. 2. All staff to global at Norcrest Meridian. Come, CC. Executive leadership all. Board members all. Vesper Ridge Legal. From Anna Vane, General Counsel, on behalf of the board proxy. Subject. Effective immediately. Leadership transition at Norcrest Meridian. The body of the email was displayed for all to read. To all employees and partners of Norcrest Meridian. Effective 8:42 p.m. Eastern Time. October 18th, the controlling voting rights of Arthur Calder have been suspended, pending a full audit by an independent board. Concurrently, Rhea Calder has been appointed Acting Chief Operating Officer, with full operational authority, effective immediately. Damien Keats has been suspended, pending a full investigation into financial irregularities. He is no longer an employee of this company and is not authorized to speak on its behalf. All further communications will come from the Office of the Acting COO. A transition team from Vesper Ridge will be on site Monday morning. Business continues as usual. A. Vane. Anna Vane's digital face looked out over the room. The notice is being sent, now. We watched the send button click. We heard the phantom whoosh in inboxes across the country, on the phones of every employee. That email was landing. The coup was complete. It was now corporate law. Anna Vane's video feed clicked off. The screen went black. The silence that returned was profound, heavier than anything that had come before. Cass turned to me. The neutral mask of the investigator was gone, replaced by a flicker of human acknowledgement. He gave a small, respectful inclination of his head. Congratulations, Ms. Calder. From the head table, there was a final, quiet movement. Elowen stood up. She did not look at Damien. She did not look at our father. She looked at the extravagant, cascading bouquet of white orchids and peonies that sat in front of her, with a single, decisive motion. She unpinned it from her dress. She laid the bouquet on the table, a final, symbolic surrender. It was not a defeat. It was an abdication. She looked at Clarissa, our stepmother, who had been shrinking into the shadows, seemed to see her cue. She, too, stood, her face a rigid mask of dignity. The two of them, the wife and the stepmother, the two women who had built their lives on the power of the men now sitting ruined beside them, shared a look of grim understanding. Elowyn turned, and Clarissa fell into step just behind her. Together, they walked, not running, but walking with a deliberate, measured pace, out of the ballroom, through the main doors, and into the night. They were not fleeing, they were regrouping. Only then did my father move. He seemed to break from his paralysis, surging to his feet. His face was a mask of primal fury. He saw the microphone I had used, still on the lectern. He lunged for it, grabbing it with a white-knuckled hand. "This is," he began, his mouth forming a word. A harsh, ripping sound of static, like a speaker being torn in half, exploded from the sound system. Grrr. He tapped the microphone, his eyes wild. "I will not." Cass, from the floor, lowered his phone. He had cut the last feed. My father stood there, opening and closing his mouth. His authority, his very voice, rendered inert. He was a silent, raging ghost in his own kingdom. I watched him for a moment. Then, I stepped forward. I took the dead microphone from his unresisting hand, as one would take a dangerous object from a confused child. I placed it back on the lectern. I did nod to Cass. He tapped his phone. The microphone I was now in front of, the main lectern mic, was live. My voice, when it came, was the only clear sound in the room. It was steady. It was calm. I looked out at the 200 stunned guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "my apologies for the interruption." I gestured to the tables, to the half-eaten fillets, the melting sorbet. "Dinner is still being served. The program has just been updated. Please, enjoy the rest of your evening." There was a second of absolute profound silence. And then, from one of the investor tables, a single person began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate sound. Then another person joined. From a table of our senior partners, and another. It wasn't polite. Celebratory applause. It was something else. It was the sound of pressure being released. It was the sound of a fever breaking. Within 10 seconds, the entire room, the guests, the partners, even the waitstaff lining the walls, was filled with a deafening, rolling wave of applause, a sound like a hard, cleansing rain. The applause washed over me, a wave of sound that felt distant, as if I were hearing it through water. I gave a single, brief nod to the room, a gesture not of thanks, but of acknowledgement. Then I turned, walked off the stage, and did not look back. I didn't go to my table. I didn't go to Cass. I walked past the stunned faces of my father and Damien, who were now toxic islands in a sea of empty chairs, and straight toward the glass doors of the terrace. I needed air. I found it in the long, glass-walled corridor that connected the ballroom to the main hall of the resort. The night had fully fallen. The corridor was silent, a soundproof tunnel between two worlds. On one side, the muffled, chaotic energy of the ruined reception. On the other, a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the vast, black mirror of the lake. A crescent moon hung in the inky sky, its reflection a silver slash on the water. The wind, coming off the lake, was cool and clean. It made the sheer, white curtains at the far end of the corridor stir and billow like ghosts. She was standing there, by the curtains, a silhouette in white against the dark glass. I had assumed she'd left with Clarissa, a strategic retreat, but Elowyn had waited. She turned as I approached. The magnificent wedding dress looked absurd now, a costume for a play that had been cancelled halfway through the first act. Her face was pale and scrubbed clean of its earlier, perfect makeup. Her eyes were swollen, but she was no longer crying. She looked exhausted, like a soldier after a long, devastating battle she hadn't understood she was fighting. We stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound the whisper of the wind against the glass and the soft sigh of the curtains. "Do you hate me?" Her voice was small, stripped of all its usual melodic confidence. It was the question of a child. It was the only question that mattered. I thought of the years of being sidelined, of being treated as the dull, necessary cog while she was polished and displayed as the family jewel. I thought of the stolen promotion, the folding chair by the coat rack, the condescending smiles, the deliberate exclusion from the family photograph, the red wine on my dress. I felt the weight of 1,000 slights, but when I looked at her, at the hollowed-out expression in her eyes, I couldn't find the hatred. It simply wasn't there. "No," I said, and the honesty of it surprised even me. My voice was quiet, matching hers. "I don't hate you, Elowen." I took a breath, the cool air feeling clean in my lungs. "I hate the way they used you. I hate that they turned you into a beautiful, smiling excuse to hide their rot." She flinched at the word rot, but she didn't deny it. She knew it was the truth. She looked down at her hands, then reached up to her perfectly coiffed hair. Her fingers fumbled with something tucked behind her ear. She pulled it free. It was a hairpin, a delicate, antique silver pin, crowned with a single, luminous pearl. It was elegant, understated, and expensive. It was the kind of thing our mother would have worn. "This was supposed to be your something borrowed," she said, her voice thick. She held it out to me on her open palm. "I had it set aside, for you, for your place in the front row." I looked at the pin, gleaming in the dim light of the corridor, and in that moment, the final piece of the puzzle slid into place, the one I hadn't even realized was missing, the seating chart, the public humiliation. She hadn't arranged it. She had planned for me to be there, right beside Clarissa, as family, as her sister. The order to banish me to the back, to place me by the coats, had come from higher up. It had been an invisible command, an executive decision from my father, designed to put me in my place before the night even began. Elowen had simply been too weak, or too scared, to fight it. "He told me it was a mistake by the coordinator," she whispered, as if reading my thoughts. "He said you had insisted on a low-profile seat, that you were being difficult. I didn't question it." "You never do," I said, but there was no bite in the words. It was just a statement of fact. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the far end of the corridor. It was Cass. He had followed me out, a silent guardian. He saw us talking. He immediately raised his phone to his ear, turned his back, and began pacing, pretending to be deep in a crucial phone call. He was giving us the illusion of privacy, a small, considerate act of intelligence that I was profoundly grateful for. I took the hairpin from her palm. My fingers brushed hers. Her skin was ice cold. "Go home, Elowen," I said softly. "Get in a car. Go back to your apartment. And don't answer your phone. Don't talk to the press. Don't talk to him," I said, nodding back toward the ballroom where Damien still sat. "Just be quiet for a few days. Let this storm pass over you." She looked at me, her eyes filling with a fresh wave of tears. But these were different. They weren't tears of shock or humiliation. They were tears of relief. I had given her an order, a way out, a path through the wreckage. She nodded, a jerky, grateful motion, and then she did something she hadn't done since we were children, since before our mother died and our family became a company. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. The embrace was awkward at first, stiff with the years of distance between us. Then, she sagged against me, and I held her. For a moment, we were not the acting COO and the disgraced bride. We were just two sisters, standing in a glass hallway, surrounded by the ruins of our family. I could smell the faint, sweet scent of the jasmine perfume she always wore. It was the same scent she'd worn to our mother's funeral, a lifetime ago. She pulled back, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and nodded again. A final, silent thank you. Then she turned and walked away down the long corridor, a solitary figure in a ruined wedding dress, walking toward whatever came next. I stood there for another minute, watching her go. I looked at the pearl pin in my hand, then I tucked it safely into my clutch. I turned and walked back toward the ballroom. My shoulders were straight. My stride was even. My breathing was deep and regular. The chaos inside me had settled, replaced by a cold, quiet clarity. As I reached the ballroom doors, I felt a vibration in my clutch. I pulled out my phone. A new calendar invitation had arrived. From Vane. Anna. Event. Transition Day. 1. Norcrest Meridian, Vesper Ridge. When? Monday, October 20th, 8 o'clock a.m., 5 o'clock p.m. Est. Where? Norcrest HQ, 45th floor boardroom. Attendees. Calder. R. Acting COO. Bylos. C. Investigative Counsel. Vesper Ridge Transition Team. I accepted the invitation. The work was just beginning. It was a monumental, ugly task. A company to stabilize, a fraud to unravel, a family to dismantle. But as I stepped back into the stark white light of the ballroom, I felt no dread, only resolve. I'll run it, I thought, the words forming with the cold precision of a business plan, not for revenge against you, Elowyn, but to clean house. I stepped back into the ballroom, and the wave of applause receded, leaving a strange, ringing silence in its wake. The room was the same, yet fundamentally altered. The stark white light remained, bleaching all the color from the expensive floral arrangements, turning the champagne in the glasses to a pale, sickly yellow. It was a crime scene where the only casualty was a lie. The guests, my audience, were slowly, uncertainly, returning to their seats. They moved with a new kind of gravity, their conversations reduced to hushed, urgent whispers. The air of forced festivity had been vacuumed out, replaced by the raw, compelling energy of a corporate takeover, the clinking of forks against china, as people resumed the pretense of eating, sounded unnervingly loud, hyper-real. It was the sound of life trying to reassert itself in the aftermath of a demolition. The DJ, under some silent instruction from Cass, had taken over. He didn't play a party anthem or a celebratory track. He chose something slow, instrumental, and deeply melancholic. A single mournful cello note spiraled through the room. It was funeral music for the version of the Calder family that had existed an hour ago. My father and Damien were still at the head table, but it was no longer a throne, it was a dock. They sat in a vast, self-imposed quarantine, a circle of empty chairs and abandoned wine glasses surrounding them. My father was slumped in his seat, his tuxedo suddenly looking 2 sizes too big for him. The titanic rage was gone, replaced by a gray, hollowed-out shock. He looked like a man who had not just lost a company, but who had lost his own reflection. Damien was staring at his useless phone, his thumb swiping at a screen that would grant him no access, no power, nothing. He was a ghost, haunting the scene of his own execution. I felt a presence beside me and turned. It was Cass. He had navigated the changed landscape of the room, the hushed tables and averted eyes, and had come to stand before me. The guests watched us, their whispers dying down again. They understood. The power was no longer at the head table. It was here, with the woman in the wine-stained dress and the man who was not the AV director. He looked at me, his gray eyes holding a quiet, professional respect. Then, in a gesture that was both a perfect echo and a complete reinvention of our first meeting, he held out his arm, his elbow bent. "One last time," he said, his voice low, a private communication in a public space. "Act like you're with me." I looked at his offered arm. The first time he'd said those words, it had been a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I was the outcast by the coat rack, the invisible sister. Taking his arm had been an act, a desperate piece of theater to survive the moment. Now it was different. There was no desperation. There was no theater. I placed my hand on his forearm. The fine, strong wool of his suit felt the same, but my touch was different. It was not the trembling hand of a victim, but the steady hand of a partner. This was not an act. It was an alliance. As my hand rested on his arm, the videographer, ever the professional, saw the shot, his camera, which had been aimlessly panning the silent crowd, swung toward us. The red light glowed. He zoomed in, framing us against the backdrop of the ruined head table. I turned my head slightly, meeting the lens without fear. A small, serene smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of triumph. It was not the gloating of a victor. It was the calm, placid smile of a person who had just taken back complete and total control of her own narrative. Across the room, Damien finally moved. He pushed his chair back, the sound loud and grating in the quiet room. He stood, his shoulders hunched. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at my father. He looked at the floor. Then he turned and walked, not toward the grand entrance, but toward a small, unmarked service door near the kitchens. No one stopped him. No one said a word. The security guards watched him go, their faces impassive. He was irrelevant now, a footnote in a story that was no longer about him. He simply vanished. On the main LED screen, which had been dark, a final message appeared. It wasn't an email or a video call. It was a system notification from the Norcrest servers, a cold, automated final word, displayed in a clean, sans serif font. 2058, Est, Board Proxy Vote, certified and filed with Corporate Secretary. Transfer of operational control executed and logged. System status, stable. Executed. The word was so final. I felt a subtle, profound shift inside me. The tension I had carried in my shoulders for years. The constant, low-grade alertness of the underdog. Finally, completely, released. The ghost of that single, lonely folding chair. The one that had been waiting for me by the coat rack. The one I had carried with me in every boardroom and every family dinner. Finally vanished. It was not just removed from the room. It was erased from the map of my life. I was no longer acting. My answer to Cass was a whisper, a breath of sound meant only for the two of us, a secret that dissolved into the mournful notes of the cello. I am. The DJ's lights, which had been static, began to move. A single, sharp beam of white light shot up from the console, hitting the vaulted glass ceiling. For a split second, it reflected my image, Cass's image, the entire silent, watching room, a perfect, clear tableau. Then the beam moved, and the reflection fractured into 1,000 shards of light, scattering into nothing. The story was over. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below to connect and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and support us by hitting the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.